Hello there, it's Tim, and I'm here again with another PowerPoint presentation, YouTube video. This one's called According to the Data, What's a Gay Anthem? This was a talk I originally gave at the Schulich School of Music's Queer History Month event in 2019. The background for this talk is that we were talking about what kinds of presentations would be shown at this event, and we discussed how stuff from the music technology area doesn't usually get shown in Queer History Month events. So I took it upon myself to make this presentation, come up with a research idea, do a little bit of research, and put it all together so that my particular field would be represented. So the goal of this project was to quantify in some sense, what does it mean when people call their own music gay on social media, on music databases, on music social media sites, or on streaming services, right? There are tons of ways in which people categorize the music they listen to or otherwise add labels to the music they listen to. For example, Spotify playlists or tags on various social media sites. And what I want to know is when people tag music they listen to with a term or a phrase that relates to L, G, B, or T, what's the genre of that music likely to be? What other tags are likely to be on that queer tagged music? But I need to get some kind of data to analyze in order to answer that question, and that turns out to be a lot harder than expected. In the beginning, I thought that Spotify would be an easy bet. There's a huge number of Spotify users, and there's a huge number of public Spotify playlists, and if I could just search them by name, I would be able to see which ones have the word gay in them, or the word queer in them, or the word lesbian in them, and I could learn a lot from that, and looking at the makeup of each playlist. But unfortunately, it seems like at some point in the past, Spotify removed the ability to search programmatically using their API for playlists by name. It looks like that capability was added in 2014, but it no longer is there. You can only search for artist names or song names by name using the API. Another possibility was Bandcamp. On Bandcamp, you can't tag other people's music. You can only tag music that you have made if you're an artist, but there's still quite a wealth of data there, possibly. Unfortunately, Bandcamp's API also seems to have been gutted and now is only accessible to labels and merchandise fulfillment partners, and doesn't have any of the things that I would need for this research. Another possibility is MusicBrainz. MusicBrainz is a big collaborative music database that has a ton of juicy metadata and really generally high quality information on many, many artists and composers and releases and record labels and genres, etc., etc. Unfortunately, when I tried to look at their tagging system and whether or not anybody had used their tagging system for gay music, there's really not much there. There's only a handful of artists that have been tagged with anything relating to queerness, and those tags that exist are kind of sporadic, and I question the overall quality of that data. I don't think I would be able to draw very interesting conclusions from them. Now, my last resort was Last.fm, a music social media site from days of yore that thankfully appears to still have a very much functioning API from which I could easily extract lots of data about music tags, what kinds of tags are related, which artists are associated most with a specific tag, and so on. If you're not familiar with Last.fm, it's a site based around logging your own personal music listening habits. They invented this term, a scrobble, which refers to a log of you having listened to a particular track. They made this up because back in the day, in the mid-aughts when Last.fm was launched, this was a novel concept. Spotify did not yet exist. So to use the site, you would download a program that would attach to your music player, your iTunes or your Winamp or whatever you were using, and whenever you played a song all the way through, it would send a little message up to the Last.fm server saying, this account listened to this song at this time. And so from information on your personal listening history, Last.fm could provide you with a lot of the statistics and graphs that Spotify users now get as part of their end-of-year wrap-ups, which are quite popular on social media these days. And this same social media aspect made Last.fm quite popular in its day before Spotify came along and kind of stole its thunder. It's still kicking around, and I still use it. This is a screen grab of my account with my username removed. You can see that I've mostly been listening to Autechre today, because Autechre is the only musical act in the world that matters. One aspect of the site that was not as widely used, but still common, was tagging. So you could add as many tags as you want to any track in your library that you have scrobbled, and this was a way that you could categorize tracks, or not really make playlists, but just kind of sort your tracks into groups. Here I've added the tag gay to the track Human Bog by Baths. I don't want to download the entirety of Last.fm myself. I don't think they would like that if I did that. I think they would probably complain to me. I'm going to use the million-song Last.fm dataset as a proxy for the actual Last.fm site. This is a huge database of contemporary popular music with information for 1 million tracks from Last.fm. 500,000 of these tracks, give or take, have at least one user tag. And I went through all those 500,000 tracks and looked at all the tags and all those tracks and found 190 tags that have something to do with the L or the G or the B or the T. Now, these 190 tags are linked to about 10,000 songs total. Unfortunately, I've had to lump all the LGBT-related words together. That's what I'm calling a queer tag, is anything that has anything to do with anything LGBT. If I just tried to look at the tags for lesbian, for example, there aren't enough songs tagged with the word lesbian to give a meaningful result. Like, it would just be an analysis of, 20 lesbians who were on Last.fm in 2009 and their particular music tastes, which is, might be interesting, but you can just go ask 20 lesbians what they like to listen to in 2009, and it'd be probably easier than doing the study all over again. So here's a couple of the tags that showed up when I looked for the most common ones. The most common one is the top left: gay, queer, queer as folk, lesbian, homosexual. There's a lot of lovely stuff in here. It kind of makes me happy to look at, to be honest, especially this one down here. That is so gay, and I love how it stucks in my head. Here's another page of the next couple most common gay tags. Pause it and look through. Read them out loud if you want to yourself. Read out loud, "I listened to this tune and become a lesbian." Shoutouts to lesbians. So from this I have two datasets. The first, which I'll just refer to as MSD, is a dataset comprising all of the tracks with at least one user tag from the million-song Last.fm dataset. And the other is a set of about 10,000 songs, where I went to Last.fm and I queried it for any song that used any of the queer tags that I found in the million-song dataset. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat the MSD as if it is a perfectly neutral cross-section of all popular music. And I'm going to see how that neutral cross-section compares statistically to this smaller 10,000 song dataset that just contains songs with queer tags in. There are three main questions I want to ask with these two datasets. First, I want to ask, what tags show up more often in queer tagged tracks? Which tags tend to show up not as often in queer tagged tracks? That is, which tags are less associated with queer tags? And how do patterns of queer tagging change over time? Here we're going to start with the first question. What tags show up more often in queer tagged tracks? This is pretty simple to test for. So I've hidden the genre names on the left, the tags on the left. The idea is that for every tag, I can calculate what's the proportion of the queer tagged tracks that have this tag, and what's the proportion of the million-song dataset tracks that have this tag. Remember, the million-song dataset is standing in for the entirety of popular music. So if something happens a lot more often in the queer tags than in the million-song dataset, I can say that it's more associated with gay, or lesbian, or queer as fuck, or queer as folk, or I am so gay and I love how it stucks in my head, and all that. So I've hidden all the tags on the left because I want you to sit back and think about knowing the cultural zeitgeist from the years 2005 to 2010, which is when Last.fm was by far the most popular. What do you think is the tag that is most associated with gayness or queerness? What do you think is the genre that is most associated with that? The top three. What are your top three? Emo, metalcore, Canadian. Emo didn't surprise me all that much. I mean, calling emo things gay back in 2005 was pretty popular among middle schoolers and such. Canadian, I'm not sure how to explain. Is it because everybody hated Justin Bieber? So after finishing this project, I wanted to go back and check if the placement of Canadian on this chart was in fact just due to Justin Bieber and people tagging Justin Bieber songs as gay, which was a thing that people did back in the days as an insult, I guess. And though he does show up in the top 5 most listened to quote-unquote gay music artists on Last.fm, as you can see here, right under System of a Down, I don't think he's the culprit, because most of his songs are not actually tagged as Canadian, and fewer of his songs are actually tagged as gay, certainly not enough to cause the term Canadian to hit number 3 most queer terms of all time. by himself. This image, by the way, doesn't actually signify that people think these artists are the most gay. I think this just means that these artists have a ton of listeners, and some of their songs are tagged with gay. I don't actually know how Last.fm calculates this stuff. Okay, anyway, back to it. Anyway, here's the rest of the queer tagged tracks, and they start making a lot more sense. Sexy makes a lot of sense. Gothic makes a lot of sense. One thing you might be expecting to see is disco, and that's not in this list at all. I went looking for it, and it turns out it's only associated with queer tags just marginally more than the average, right? It's something like 25% more likely to accompany a queer tag than your average genre is. I think that says something about what the demographics of Last.fm's user base were in the years 2005 to 2010 and what the overall opinion of disco was at that time. Now we can investigate just the opposite question. Which tags on Last.fm tracks are least likely to accompany queer tags? Which ones are most likely to not show up with queer tags? Here's the chart for that question. Apparently rock is not very clear, oldies are not very queer, jazz is not very queer. Now I've hidden the last entry here. What do you think is the tag that is least likely to accompany queer tags? What is the descriptor of music that is least likely to also apply to music that could be described as queer? That's right, it's American. I love this. Now, I want to be totally clear about what this actually means, right? This means that music that people thought it was important to tag as American is not music that people thought was important to tag as queer. This does not mean that American artists are less queer. This means that people who, were distinctly American enough that people wanted to tag them as American, are substantially less likely to also be tagged as queer, right? So after seeing these results, I immediately wanted to know what other countries were queer and what other countries were not queer. On the current chart, as well as the chart in the previous slide, I only included tags that comprised at least 1% of the tagged tracks in the million song dataset. For looking at countries and nationalities, I'm going to relax that just because I want to see what shows up. And here's the result. I'll let you soak that in. By far, the nationality that is most associated with tracks that have queer tags is Japanese. I do not know how much of this is vandalism on the part of people who don't like J-rock in the year 2005, or people who like J-rock and J-pop expressing their genuine opinions about music that they like. Much of the rest of this chart is likely statistical noise, in my opinion, although I have had some people suggest to me that Eurovision and the popularity of Eurovision may contribute to some of these European countries looking more queer than non-European countries. And, of course, America is, once again, at the bottom, both the tag USA and American. I'm not too surprised. So the last thing I wanted to look at is how do patterns of queer tagging change over time? Right? This is difficult to look at. Last.fm doesn't provide information on the date in which tracks were released, right? What I had to do is I had to cross-reference tracks from Last.fm with tracks from MusicBrainz, because Last.fm has the information on gay tags, and MusicBrainz has really good information on the date in which stuff was released. So I found about 6,000 queer tagged tracks with a definite release date. Using this, I answered the question, in our collection of queer tagged tracks, which tags are used more on older music, and which are used more on newer music? What I was expecting to find here was a pattern of terms going in and out of vogue. Perhaps there were terms people started using to describe their music only in 2010 that weren't quite as popular back in 2005, or vice versa. What I found were a bunch of tags written by edgy teenagers in the late aughts. It isn't anything homophobic or racist in an interesting or noteworthy way. It really just reads to me like a bunch of kids who just learned what slurs were and got really excited to use them online. I don't really know what I was expecting, considering that I was looking at unmoderated data concerning a class of people who comprise a social minority. But yeah, unfortunately, it seems that what's changed the most over the years covered by this, I will remind you, very small and not terribly formal study, are the number of slurs and otherwise racist, transphobic, and homophobic terms used in tags on the songs of artists that people want to express their disagreement with. And for what it's worth, I tried filtering out all these terms and looking just at genres, right, to see if maybe there's a genre of music that wasn't considered quite queer enough in 2005, but was in 2015. And unfortunately, there really wasn't any kind of correlation there that was statistically significant enough for me to talk about with any kind of confidence. So yeah, that's kind of a bummer note to end on, but that's the note that I am ending on. So what have we learned? We've learned that it's actually pretty difficult to do research like this because the sources of data we have at our disposal are not nearly big enough as datasets for one, and also quite difficult to interpret. And given the subject matter, it's hard to tell vandalism from actual good faith data entries. We've also learned that queer music is probably gothic or industrial or Canadian, probably not British or jazz, and it's definitely not American. Thanks for watching. Here are my socials. I'll do another math video someday. I still haven't finished my dissertation. I have an album coming out on the 9th of July, 2022. It's called Total Swarm for Young Men. You can listen to that if you want. Your husband's gonna love it.